With YouTube videos, content is really important, but sometimes as a creator it's quite difficult to find the right content at the right time. I'm obviously trying to put out 2 videos a week around other commitments. So I'm always on the lookout for topics that we can bring to the channel, and perhaps that are a bit different, a bit interesting, some that you might have seen, some you might not have seen. And this week I just happened to stumble on an article, and I've seen it in a number of sources, that really resonated with me. And it was about a ban on photography in certain areas of Gion in Kyoto in Japan. And it just piqued my interest because I've been to Japan a couple of times and I found it a really photo-friendly environment there. It's obviously the home of a lot of great camera makes, and people are pretty relaxed with street photography, with people taking their pictures, and it is a very culturally respectful country, and therefore it's important to take the right approach. And from what I can gather from the various sources that have reported this ban on photography, is that it's been sparked by what have been called rude tourists and photographers in this area of Kyoto. It's a very traditional area in Kyoto. It's one that's frequented by geckos and makos, and it's a very beautiful area. But it does attract a lot of tourists, and there have been reports of tourists chasing geckos down the street, pulling their kimonos, running onto private property to take photos, and generally making a nuisance of themselves, harassing the locals. So the locals have come up with a solution, which is a ban on photography in the private alleyways in that area, and it is backed up with a fine of 10,000 yen, which is about $100 for offenders. They've put up signs so you know when you are going on to private property, which some of these alleyways are in that area, and it tells you can't use smartphones or cameras to take photos. And it's in the private alleyways around the Hanamakoji Dori, or Hanamakoji Street, that this is taking effect, and it takes effect straight away. As I say, I've been to Japan a number of times, and I'll put up a couple of images from that area so you can get a feel for the nature of the area. The first one was taken on a Friday evening in the sunset, with a couple of ladies in traditional kimonos walking off down one of these alleyways into the sun, and it just gave a really nice ambience, I thought, when I could bring out in post-production and stylize the photo. The second one is also from that area. It's of a gecko or a mako and her chaperone walking down the street, and they do walk very fast, and I was keeping a respectful distance behind. I was lucky, there was virtually no one else in the street. It was out of season, it was in the autumn. It was just as the sun was going down on quite a dull day, but I managed to capture the interaction between the mako and her chaperone as she moved between locations, and it's an image I keep coming back to, and for me embodies some of the spirit and the culture of that area of Kyoto. So it feels quite sad that the locals in Gion have had to get to this point where they ban all photography in these alleyways, which are private, so they are within their rights to do it. But it makes me quite sad because actually Japan, as I say, is a very photo-tolerant nation, and therefore people taking photographs have really had to have pushed it quite a long way for this to have happened. I don't for one moment suggest it's serious photographers that are perhaps causing this nuisance, although there may have been some within the population who have caused it. It is a very touristic area. You do get a lot of tourists all trying to get that hero shot of what is a very small population of geckos and makos. They are trying to get their hero image, and therefore they've clearly overstepped the mark on a number of occasions to push the locals into this action. Now, those of you who've been to Japan will know that it's not that long ago that Japan was a relatively closed culture, and there were very few overseas tourists that tended to go to Japan. With their progression towards the big events that are coming up or are taking place at the moment, the Rugby World Cup and the Olympics next year, Japan has been making great efforts to attract more inbound tourists, and they've been putting a lot of effort into this to make it a really attractive destination to go, and I definitely recommend it. Have a look at my earlier videos where I've done a couple of videos showing you some of the images, some of the locations I've been to in Japan, It's one of those places, a bit like the UK, it's seasonal. I've been in the summer and the autumn, and still on my bucket list to go back in the winter, to perhaps go up into the north to visit and take photos of the cranes, and also in the spring for the cherry blossom. Another thing that tweaked my interest in the article was that actually in a number of the articles they've referred to tourists chasing geishas. Now, if any of you have been to Kyoto, you will know that actually in Kyoto you get geikos and meikos, not geishas. So that was a little bit of journalistic license there where they got it slightly wrong. And for me that's a bit like the reference to photographers versus tourists, because I'm hoping that actually this wasn't caused by serious photographers, it was caused by over-enthusiastic tourists. Because street photography is a genre which is really about capturing the natural scenes in the street or the urban environment. It's very close to reportage. It really isn't about chasing someone down the street and creating a situation. It's about reporting what you see in that urban environment. And therefore, as I say, I hope serious photographers haven't really been involved in this. So I've got some travel coming up, and I thought, reading the article, it got me thinking about, what are my top 3 things I think about when I'm traveling that might be of use to some of you. Well, firstly, when I'm traveling, I like to understand the laws of where I'm going with regards to photography, but also the culture, because the two can be very different. It's really important to understand what's okay, what's not okay, where are the boundaries from a legal perspective, but also a cultural perspective. And it's that cultural perspective that I think is more important. And it's that line that people have overstepped in Gion to cause this issue. So the second thing is, if in doubt, just have a chat to the person, ask their permission, ask if it's okay. You'll tend to find in Japan and a lot of cultures, people are really friendly, and actually if you interact with them you'll get better shots. I've been lucky that when we've been in Japan and when we've been in places like Vietnam and Cambodia, we've hired a guide for a day, certainly early on in the trip, to really get the lay of the land, someone local who you can ask advice, you can get the in-depth knowledge that very quickly that will set you up to get some great shot. Thirdly, if you can, avoid the tourist hotspots, and if you are going to the tourist hotspots, see if you can find times to go when it's less busy, so you don't get caught up in the tourist swell that's going through some of these hero locations, and that can detract from the shots you get. You'll find if you go earlier in the morning, later in the evening, or perhaps out of season, you will get different shots. You will get your hero shots rather than the hero shots you perhaps see in stock images in the travel brochures. You will get to know the real location rather than the location that is published. You may not get the optimum weather, you may not get the hero shot as the general public would see in brochures or books, but you will get your hero shot, and that's what's really important to me. So I hope you found those 3 tips and tricks useful. Let us know in the comments below, what are your tips and tricks for when you're traveling? How do you get the optimum shots? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified of future videos. And I look forward to seeing you in a future video.